today's episode of Arms and Arguments, we're going to tackle a fiery question. Are public schools emblematic of socialism, while private schools showcase capitalism? We'll walk through the definitions of these economic systems, survey real data on school performance, and explore the ideals behind each, whether you're defending state-run education or arguing for market-driven choice. This is the ultimate schoolyard battle of ideas. Let's dive in. In the United States, about 83% of K through 12 students attend public schools and only around 10% or less attend private schools, but opinions are all over the map. Let's first define our terms. Capitalism is an economic system based on the private ownership of means of production and their use for the purpose of obtaining profit. It emphasizes private property, competition, profit motive, and innovation. Businesses and individuals freely invest in goods or services, and market forces largely determine prices and allocation of the resources. In contrast, socialism is an economic and political philosophy characterized by social ownership of the means of production as opposed to private ownership. In socialist systems, resources or industries are owned or regulated by the state or community, with an emphasis on egalitarian distribution and collective good. Socialists typically prioritize reducing inequality through government planning, public welfare programs, and common ownership. In practice, most modern economies are mixed. They combine market features with some government intervention. Capitalism is market-driven, decentralized, profit-driven, individual choice, innovation, and competition, where socialism is state or collective ownership, centralized planning, emphasis on public welfare and equality. Think of capitalism like a free market classroom where each student competes to design the best science project versus socialism as a collective class where the teacher assigns equal tasks to everyone. Both may have strengths and both may have critiques. Schools as a battleground. Let's talk public versus private. The U.S. K through 12 education system reflects the ideological split. Public schools are funded by tax dollars, so they're run by the government and free at the point of use. By law, children are guaranteed a free education in their local public school. Public schools, however, must follow all state standards and serve all students no matter their background. They aim to ensure universal access and a common civic foundation for democracy. By contrast, private schools are independently operated. They charge a tuition, often supplemented by donations or endowments, and they are not bound by every state regulation. Many are religious. About 77% of the U.S. private school students attend faith-based schools, or they may also specialize in certain curricula. Because they rely on paying families or specific communities, private schools have autonomy over their curriculum and class size. Public schools, which are taxpayer-funded, tuition-free, must accept all students. Standardized curriculum set by the district, where private schools are tuition-based, they have selective enrollment, and often are religious or elite. Then you have the oddball charter schools, publicly funded, independently run. These schools blur the line by combining features of both. But for the fundamental split, public schooling is managed by the state and private schooling operates a competitive market. So let's dive into public schools a little bit. Do public schools have a socialistic legacy? When critics call public schools socialistic, they point to the monopoly-like government-ran nature of the system. All public school revenue comes from taxes, and attendance is compulsory by law. The government effectively owns the means of production, the school buildings, teacher pay, textbooks, etc. For example, one observer noted that the U.S. K through 12 system is perhaps the most socialistic endeavor of the U.S., albeit acknowledging that free public education is also seen as necessary for democracy to thrive. Public schools' mission is egalitarian. They aim to give every child a baseline education, irrespective of family income. Advocates argue this levels the playing field and teaches citizenship, but critics see downsides to the lack of competition. Some say a state-run monopoly can breed bureaucracy and stagnation. Nobel laureate economist Milton Friedman famously quipped that one should not expect a public school system to teach free enterprise, noting it survives only through compulsion and taxation, and abhors competition. In practice, challenges are evident. The U.S. spends among the highest per student in the world, yet outcomes are only average. For context, the PISA 2022, the U.S. scored above the OECD in reading, even if not failing. Many point to crowded classrooms, union rules, and aging schools as symptoms of the system's rigidity. Some pros of public schools do include universal access to democratic accountability and shared civic values. But the cons, which may outweigh, you have to determine that yourself, can include the one-size-fits-all curriculum, limited choice, and political interference. Private schools, on the other hand, they market competition and choice. Private schools represent the other end of the spectrum, a market-based approach to education. Because they charge tuition, they must appeal to paying families. This creates incentives to innovate, and it pleases customers, which are the parents and the students. In theory, competition drives quality. A failing private school risks losing enrollment, whereas a great one attracts tuition dollars. Many private schools boast smaller class sizes. They have specialized programs, STEM, arts, religious values, and often show higher test scores. For instance, raw data often shows private school students outperforming public counterparts on standardized tests 8 to 18 points higher. Private schools can select their student body, so they often enroll more advantaged kids, which does partially explain those higher scores. But supporters argue that private options allow high-demand families to invest in better learning, and it even puts pressure on public schools to improve. Private schools' advantages include school choice, curricular flexibility, and alignment with family values. They can tailor education to niches such as gifted programs or faith-based teaching. However, they can also exacerbate inequality. Not everyone can afford them, and they may skim off motivated families. In the U.S., only about 10% of students are in private schools, roughly 6% of 15-year-olds, highlighting that this remains a choice for a minority. Ultimately, private schooling is a capitalist experiment in education. Different providers compete in a marketplace. So let's get into the competition and innovation and some of the evidence. How do markets impact school performance? Research suggests from around the world suggests competition can boost achievement. One Harvard study analyzing international PISA data concluded that greater private school competition correlates with better outcomes for all students. In countries where more kids attend private schools, like the Netherlands with around 75% private enrollment, or even Ireland, which has high private school enrollment, national test scores tend to be higher than in countries with a few private options. Notably, the study found that a 10% increase in private school enrollment was associated with nearly a half-year gain in math achievement and lower per-pupil spending. In other words, introducing market pressures appeared to improve productivity. Schools achieved more with less. So even when public and private students each benefit, the effect on public school quality is striking. The authors observed that students in public schools profit nearly as much from increased private school competition as do the nation's students as a whole. The competition hypothesis is that if a public school loses students to a new private competitor, it must improve or innovate to retain enrollment. This dynamic underpins the rise of charter schools and voucher programs in the U.S., which attempts to simulate the competition. While data does support some gains from competition, the picture is nuanced. Many high-performing education systems, for example, Finland, Japan, and Canada, rely almost entirely on strong public schools. So simply copying another country's mix may not work without other reforms. But the evidence suggests that giving parents more choice and providers more incentives is one way to shake up a stagnant system. Now let's dive into student outcomes. Do private schools excel? The ultimate question is, which students learn more? U.S. studies show mixed results. Without adjustment, private schools often lead in test scores. For example, the NAEP found private 8th graders scored 18 points higher in reading than their public peers. But once you adjust for family background, income, parent education, etc., those differences largely shrink. The same study reported that after accounting for student demographics, the adjusted advantage for private schools disappeared in most subjects. In fact, the only significant adjusted difference were in favor of public schools for 4th grade math and in favor of private 8th grade reading. In simple terms, the raw data favors private schools, but much of the gap is because private schools enroll students from much more privileged families. International assessments also echo this. OECD's FISA 2022 shows that the U.S. slightly above average in reading and science, ranking 6th and 12th among rich nations, and just below average in math, 28th. No system is uniformly best, and the U.S.'s results are middling overall. What we do see is that Americans value both systems. A recent survey found 36% of Americans saying that they prefer socialism to capitalism. But many still support free schools for all and also charter voucher options. The data suggests that the quality can be found in both sectors and that choosing between ideologies alone doesn't guarantee better education. Arguments from both sides in debating public versus private ideological arguments run hot. Free market advocates quote Milton Friedman's point that a monopolistic state-run school system abhors competition and cannot instill free enterprise values. They argue that the competition breeds excellence. Just as businesses innovate to win customers, schools must innovate or lose students. They believe private schools turn loose the creative, God-given energies of the human spirit, echoing a famous market mantra. On the other hand, however, supporters of public education counter that government schools are the cornerstone of a democracy. Quality public education is seen as a public good, one that promotes citizenship and equal opportunity. They warn that unfettered markets can lead to inequality and neglect of disadvantaged kids. Many note that even in mixed economies, basic services like education often rely on public funding to ensure no one is left out. In practice, U.S. policy reflects a middle ground. We have a public funding, also charter schools, magnet schools, private school vouchers in some states, and a robust homeschooling effort. Even the affluent often send children to public school if it's nearby and good. This mixed approach acknowledges that neither pure socialism nor pure capitalism owns the right answer. So in conclusion, what we're trying to find a practical path. After this deep dive, where do we land? Socialism versus capitalism in education is more than an academic debate. It touches on values and resources. We saw that public schools embody collective provision, while private schools harness market incentives. We saw evidence both ways. Private competition can nudge achievement up, but public schools are the workhorses of democracy. Personally, I come down firmly on the side of options and innovations. The socialist model's goals of equal opportunity are noble, but too often public schools become complacent with guaranteed funding. Private schools and charter and voucher programs inject creative pressure into the system. They encourage new teaching methods, curriculums, and accountability. That said, we shouldn't let the market rule entirely. Without oversight and some redistributive policies, poor children can get left behind. A balanced approach, think a mixed economy of education, may seem the wisest. In the U.S., that might mean strong public schools plus more charter and choice. So families really have alternatives. Policymakers could follow the Nordic lesson of high standards and teacher support and keep competition alive via charters and vouchers. Ideology aside, the goal is to educate our nation's kids. we harness both the communal spirit of the public schooling and the ingenuity of private schools. That's all for today's debate. Thanks for listening to Arms and Arguments. I'm Nick Lewis. I hope this breakdown fuels the next big schoolyard discussion.